Hey there, mystery lovers. Welcome to Unknown Horizon, where we unravel the secrets hidden in the shadows and dive deep into the unknown. I'm Ian Cartwell, your guide on this thrilling journey through unsolved cases, eerie legends, and mind-bending mysteries. Each week we'll explore a different enigma, whether it's a chilling true crime story, a haunting urban legend, or a puzzling historical event. So grab your magnifying glass, turn down the lights, and let's embark on a quest for the truth. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our community of curious minds. Together, we'll seek the answers to questions that keep us up at night. Let's begin. Disappeared in Redwood Hills, Act 1. The Vanishing. The town of Redwood Hills was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to change. Nestled between rolling hills and thick forests, the small town thrived on a steady rhythm of routine. Everybody knew everybody. That's why when Lila Anderson disappeared one cold autumn evening, the entire town was shaken to its core. Lila was 17, full of life and energy, with an adventurous spirit. She was well liked at school, and though her mother, Maggie Anderson, worried like any good parent, she trusted Lila. After all, she had raised her on her own, and their bond was strong. Lila always told her where she was going, and Maggie always believed her. That was until one Friday night when Lila left for a supposed study group and never came back. At first, Maggie thought it was a mistake. Maybe Lila had stayed at a friend's house and forgot to tell her. She sent texts, growing more anxious with each passing hour. Her phone calls went unanswered, her messages unread. Panic started creeping in. The clock ticked past midnight, then 1 a.m., and finally Maggie found herself pacing the living room floor, her hands trembling. By morning, Maggie was at the police station, filing a missing person report. The local police were polite but not alarmed. "Teenagers," they said. "They go off sometimes, but they usually come back." Maggie didn't argue, but she knew in her gut that this wasn't like Lila. Days passed. The police searched Lila's usual hangouts, interviewed her friends, but no one knew where she was. Maggie's desperation grew with each unanswered call. The town's gossip mill churned, and people whispered about what might have happened. But to Maggie, every theory felt empty. She couldn't sit still anymore. One night, unable to sleep, Maggie sat down in front of Lila's computer, a feeling of dread settling in her chest. It felt like a violation of trust, but Maggie had to do something. She opened Lila's social media, scrolling through the recent posts and messages. Everything looked normal at first, photos of friends, comments about school. But then Maggie noticed something strange. There were gaps. Messages that had been deleted. Conversations that seemed to end abruptly. Maggie's hands shook as she searched deeper, and there, in a hidden folder, she found something. An email thread, encrypted, with a strange name at the top, The Watchers. "What is this?" she whispered to herself. The messages were cryptic, filled with codes and anonymous usernames. Maggie could barely understand them, but one thing was clear. Lila had been involved in something secret, something dangerous. Maggie's heart raced. She needed help. That's when she thought of her nephew, Ben. He was only a few years older than Lila, a college student studying computer science. If anyone could help her crack this, it would be him. A few hours later, Maggie sat in her living room, watching as Ben worked at Lila's computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He was quiet for a long time, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This is bad," Ben finally said, leaning back in his chair. Lila was involved in some kind of underground community. They call themselves the Watchers. It's not just a chat room or some dumb game. This is serious. "What do you mean?" Maggie asked, her voice tight with fear. "They do real-life challenges, dangerous ones. People pay to watch these kids do crazy, illegal things, and Lila, she was part of it. Maggie's blood ran cold. She couldn't believe it. Her Lila? The same girl who stayed up late watching old movies with her, who had never been in serious trouble before. "Is there any way to find out where she went?" Maggie asked, her voice cracking. "I'm working on it," Ben replied, tapping more keys. "But whoever's running this is smart. They've covered their tracks pretty well." As the days wore on, Maggie continued her own investigation, driven by a fierce, unrelenting need to find her daughter. She spoke to Lila's friends, but no one knew anything, or at least no one was willing to admit it. One name kept coming up in the conversations: Ryan King, Lila's best friend. Ryan had been at the house more times than Maggie could count. She'd always thought he had a soft spot for Lila, maybe even a crush, but when Maggie knocked on his door, his answers were short, evasive. Something wasn't right. "Ryan, if you know anything, please," Maggie pleaded. "I need to find her." Ryan's face was pale, and his eyes darted nervously around the room. I don't know, Mrs. Anderson," he stammered. "I wish I did." But Maggie wasn't convinced. She left feeling more unsettled than before. Certain Ryan knew more than he was letting on. Meanwhile, Ben made progress. He traced Lila's last known location to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a place no one went to anymore. Maggie didn't wait for the police. She couldn't. With Ben and Detective Cruz, who had finally come around to Maggie's side, they followed the trail to the warehouse. Inside, the cold air hit Maggie's face as they stepped into the darkened space. It was empty, except for the remnants of a hastily abandoned setup: cameras, wires, computers. It was the command center for the Watchers. And then, in the corner, they found something that made Maggie's heart stop: Lila's backpack tossed on the ground, as if she had been there just hours before. But Lila wasn't there. She had vanished again. It was as if the shadows of the Watchers had swallowed her whole. The story doesn't end there, of course. Maggie's journey to find Lila was far from over. She would uncover more secrets, dive deeper into the twisted world her daughter had been pulled into, and face dangers she never could have imagined. But one thing was clear: Maggie would not stop. No matter what it took, no matter how far she had to go, she would find her daughter. The question was, would Lila be the same when she did? Act 2. Into the Shadows. The cold, empty warehouse left Maggie trembling. Lila's backpack was here, tossed carelessly on the floor like an afterthought, but there was no sign of her daughter. Maggie knelt beside it, her hands shaking as she clutched the worn fabric. She whispered Lila's name, her voice lost in the hollow space. Detective Cruz stood nearby, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. Ben, hunched over a nearby table covered with wires and screens, was furiously typing into his laptop, trying to pull any information he could from the abandoned setup. "I can't find much," Ben muttered. "They wiped everything clean, but wait." He leaned closer to the screen. "There's one file left, a video." Maggie shot up, her heart pounding. "Play it." Ben hesitated, looking at Maggie with concern. "Are you sure you want to see this?" "I need to know what happened to my daughter." With a reluctant nod, Ben hit play. The screen flickered, and soon a grainy video filled the monitor. It showed Lila, standing in the same warehouse they were in now. She looked scared but defiant, her eyes scanning the room as if she knew someone was watching her. A voice, distorted and low, echoed from the speakers. "Are you ready for the final challenge?" Lila hesitated, then nodded. "I am." The video cut out abruptly, leaving Maggie in stunned silence. "Final challenge?" she whispered. "What does that mean?" Detective Cruz knelt beside her, her voice low and measured. "We need to figure out what this final challenge was and who's behind it. If she's still involved with the Watchers, then she's in serious danger, and we don't have much time." The investigation deepened, and Maggie's once quiet life unraveled further. Every lead seemed to bring more questions than answers. And Ryan... Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more than he was telling. She cornered him outside school one afternoon, desperate for the truth. "Ryan, you need to stop lying to me," Maggie said, her voice wavering between anger and fear. "You were her best friend. If anyone knows where she is, it's you." Ryan looked down, guilt flickering across his face. "I tried to stop her, Mrs. Anderson, I really did, but she wouldn't listen. She thought this was her way out." "Way out of what?" Maggie asked, confused. Ryan sighed heavily. Lila wanted more than what this town could offer. She got involved with the Watchers because she thought it was her ticket to something bigger. Fame, money, whatever. But it's not what she thought it was. No one ever wins. No one gets out. Maggie's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, no one gets out?" "The people who run the Watchers. They don't let anyone leave once you're in too deep. They force you to play, over and over, with more dangerous challenges every time. And if you fail, well, people go missing for a reason." Tears welled up in Maggie's eyes. "So, why didn't you help her?" Ryan looked away, shame in his voice. "I was scared. They warned me to keep quiet, or I'd be next." Maggie's anger flared. She grabbed Ryan by the shoulders, shaking him. "You could have saved her." "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." That night, back at home, Maggie couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with thoughts of Lila trapped in a world she couldn't escape. She pored over every piece of evidence they had, her eyes red from exhaustion. Ben had been working tirelessly as well, pulling whatever digital threads he could find, and that's when he discovered it. A hidden chat room connected to the Watchers. "They're planning another event," Ben said, his voice tense as he peered at the screen. "A live stream, and Lila's name is on the list of participants. It's happening tomorrow night." Maggie's breath caught in her throat. "Where?" Ben clicked through the site, narrowing his eyes. "It's coded, but if I can just crack this last encryption..." "Got it." His face went pale. "It's in the old Redwood Hills water tower. They're going to make her climb it." Maggie's heart raced. The water tower was over 100 feet tall, long abandoned and rusting away. The idea of Lila being forced to climb it as part of a twisted game made her sick to her stomach. The final confrontation. The following night, Maggie, Detective Cruz, and Ben headed for the water tower. The air was thick with tension, the wind howling as they approached the towering structure. Floodlights illuminated the area, and Maggie could see figures moving around near the base. The Watchers, setting up for their next challenge. "Stay back," Cruz ordered, signaling to her team. "We need to approach this carefully." But Maggie wasn't listening. She couldn't. Her daughter was somewhere up there, and every second wasted felt like one more step toward disaster. Without thinking, she broke into a sprint, running toward the tower. "Lila!" Maggie screamed, her voice hoarse. "Lila! Where are you?" A figure appeared at the top of the tower. Lila. She was clinging to the rusty ladder, high above the ground, her eyes wide with terror. Below her, Maggie could see the masked figures of the Watchers, their faces hidden, their cameras trained on the scene. "Mom?" Lila's voice was small, barely audible over the wind. "I'm here!" Maggie shouted, tears streaming down her face. "Just hold on! Don't move!" One of the masked figures stepped forward, his voice distorted by the voice modulator. "You can't interfere," he growled. "She made her choice." Maggie's fear turned to rage. She's my daughter. This isn't a choice. This is torture. The figure raised his hand, as if signaling Lila to continue climbing. Lila hesitated, her grip slipping slightly on the ladder, but she didn't move. "I'm not playing anymore," Lila shouted down. "I quit." The figure's voice hardened. "There's no quitting. You know the rules." Just as the tension seemed ready to snap, Detective Cruz and her team burst from the shadows, guns drawn. The masked figures scattered, disappearing into the night as the police moved in. Maggie didn't care. All she cared about was Lila, still perched high above them. "Lila, climb down slowly," Cruz called up. "We've got you." With trembling hands, Lila started her descent, each movement slow and cautious. Maggie held her breath, watching every step, until finally, Lila's feet touched the ground. Without hesitation, Maggie ran to her, pulling her into a tight embrace. "It's over," Maggie whispered, stroking Lila's hair. "You're safe now." But Lila's eyes were distant, haunted by the things she had seen, the things she had been forced to do. Act 3. Aftermath. In the days that followed, the Watchers were taken down, their twisted operation dismantled by the police. But for Maggie and Lila, the nightmare wasn't over. Lila struggled to adjust to life after her ordeal, the scars of her experience running deep. She had been lured into a world of danger and deceit, and the road to healing would be long. Maggie, too, had changed. The fear of losing her daughter had shaken her to her core, but she had proven, both to herself and to Lila, that she would go to the ends of the earth to protect her. One evening, as they sat on the porch together watching the sun dip below the horizon, Lila turned to her mother. "Thank you," she whispered. Maggie smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from Lila's face. "I'd do it again, 1,000 times." And as the light faded, they sat in silence, knowing that though their world had been darkened, they had found their way back to each other.